John Bennett told me to do that first so that you could hear me. And Bob is right. I have, for a long time, had an interest in the subject matter. I didn't realize it at the time when I was in high school, but apparently I was really unusual. You could call me strange, perhaps, because at lunchtime, I was the kid that went to the high school library and got the Wall Street Journal and spread it out on a table and sat there and read it. I was probably the only kid in the entire school that did that. I don't know why. I was fascinated by the whole notion of it. So apparently that's still evident today that I find it an interesting concept. So let me make a couple comments on the front end, which is number one, while I do have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge with regard to financial matters, financially related things, and I'm pretty good with those kinds of matters. I'm not, however, though, a scholar on Proverbs. So what I'm going to try to do this evening is sort of a combination of take what Proverbs says, and we're going to look at what the application is to us today and some of the attitudes that we do need to have. I promise you we will talk about Proverbs, but I've got to spend a few minutes talking about why the study about money, why it's relevant, why it's important, why it's something we need to spend a little bit of time on, because after all, doesn't Matthew chapter 6 tell us not to worry about tomorrow? Well, it says not to, the passage that I've got up there reads, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. We're told not to worry. We're not told not to prepare for tomorrow, okay? We're not told, we're obviously told to be good stewards. We have to have the responsibility to provide for ourselves. What is interesting, think about this. Everything that I say this evening, the support to this congregation, the support for the Lord's work, we can see even going back into the New Testament when the churches were established, you know, they were told to financially support the work, the Christians, you know, at that time. Everything that I'm going to say does ultimately tie back to that. So let's get into this. We're not going to jump into Proverbs immediately. We're going to do a little American history test first of all. January 31st, 1940, Ida Mae Fuller of Ludlow, Vermont was the first American to do what? What's that? What'd you just say? Social Security. So Guy Soul apparently stole my notes because he didn't even need the clue that I was going to give you. She achieved that at the age of 65. There she is going to her mailbox. She did, in fact, she is the first recipient of a Social Security check ever in America. Okay? Here are the facts about Ida Mae Fuller's Social Security experience. She paid into Social Security for 3 years. Her total FICA tax contributions were $24.75. I have more money than that in my left pocket right now, okay? I got about $25 there. Her initial monthly check was $22.54. Now, you don't have to be a mathematical genius, and Jan is, I can see the wheels back here turning with Jan right now, but you don't have to understand math very well. Is this equation going to work out real well over a long window of time? It's not. It's not. $22.54 was the size of that first check. Ida lived to the age of 100. Her total payments were just under $23,000. How much did she put into the system? $24.75, and she took out $23,000. Clearly, this was a system set up by politicians, right? Because it's going to fail, okay? The life expectancy in 1940, for males, it was 60.8 years. For females, it was 65.2. And you were eligible to start drawing your benefit at the age of 65. Well, clearly, you weren't supposed to draw very long, right? You can see that. Ida Mae Fuller absolutely blew up the system. The first Social Security recipient absolutely, drew out way more than what the actuaries had projected that she would. Now, so here's my question to you. Why does Social Security still exist today? Why has it continued to make it as long as it has? We're 83 years into it. There's one variable that has kept it alive to this point. What is it? National debt, yes, no. It's, you're kind of close, Chris. Politicians. No, come on. I'm actually part of the group that has kept this thing afloat. Baby boomers. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm 61. I'm at the very tail end of the baby boom generation. Interestingly enough, in about 11 months, technically I become eligible to begin drawing Social Security payments. I won't do that. See me for later as to why that's not a great idea unless you're actually going to retire at 62. My point, though, is that Ida Mae Fuller and my grandparents, my parents, and so forth, to a large degree, were supported by a significant number of workers behind them. How many workers are behind me in the system? Think about that, okay? Let me give you some data here. In June of 2022, the Social Security Administration acknowledged that the funds to pay Social Security benefits would be exhausted. Did anybody see this report? This was just this past June, 5 months ago. Yes? No? What year do you think Social Security funds will be exhausted? 2035. Oh, somebody did see that report. 2035. Folks, that's only 12, 13 years away. Now, here's what's going to happen. So the money that is sitting there from which benefits are being paid today is expected to run dry. At that point in time, everybody that's younger than me, because in 12 more years, I'm going to be 73 years old, okay? Everybody that's younger than me is going to be, your payroll withholding is going to be going directly into my pocket at that point. Make sense? So there is no intermediate stopping ground. It's not going to go somewhere and rest for a little while. It's going to come in and go right back out. But in order for it to do that, what has to happen to the benefits that I'm receiving at that point in time? June 2022, they acknowledged that that flow of funds will be enough to support 75% of what the obligations are. John Everson better be prepared for about 3/4 of a Social Security benefit. Now remember, it's a system designed and operated and such by politicians, so maybe that's why mathematically it doesn't work real well, okay? So just a few years out. Now, I want to touch on one other thing real quick, and you're going to understand why this all ties back to Proverbs here in a second. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, okay, so I won't have Social Security, but after all, I do have my pension. If you're older than me, you probably have a defined benefit pension plan. If you're younger than me, you probably do not have a defined benefit pension plan. If you're self-employed, I know you don't have a defined benefit pension plan, okay, because you're on your own. What's interesting about this is that defined benefit pensions, they are required to send you annually a copy, a schedule of how well funded that pension plan is. Have you ever read it? You probably should. Right now, today in America, it's estimated that defined benefit pension plans are underfunded. You ready for this number? By $1 trillion. In other words, companies have made promises, obligations, commitments. Oh, yeah, you work this many years at this average salary and we'll pay you under this formula. We'll pay you to the day you die. And that promise is good until it isn't. Does that make sense? That promise is good until it isn't. How many of you in here have heard of the PBGC, Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation? Nobody? This is interesting. There is a member of this congregation who is very well aware of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation because the company they used to work for went bankrupt. And a lot of people don't realize this, don't know this. If your company goes bankrupt under Chapter 7, bankruptcy chapter, the pension obligations are a dischargeable obligation to the company. Your pension just stopped, okay? There will be no check next month. Those assets, those resources then get turned over to the PBGC. It's an entity of the federal government, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. They then will send you a reduced amount of money then for the rest of your life, okay? PBGC right now currently is underfunded to the tune of about $40 billion. In other words, obligations they've taken of failed companies, and they don't have enough money. So the reason why I point all this out is to say that just because we should not worry about tomorrow, but we certainly should prepare for tomorrow, okay? So those are the things we have to take a look at. Most employer pension plans today, for those, again, younger than me, Typically, their retirement plan is funded how? What kind of a plan is it? It's a number, starts with a 4. 401k, notice everybody knows that term, right? Those are what are referred to as defined contribution plans. What your employer is doing is they've defined, here's the contribution that we'll put in. We'll match you, we'll give you X number of dollars. Their obligation to you as a retiree ends the day they make that deposit while you're working. The day you retire, whatever that accumulated and accrued balance is, that's yours. If you weren't wise, you took your resources and you were exceptionally conservative with them and you did not generate sufficient growth, and you've only got a exceptionally modest amount of money, when you get to retirement, good luck, because your employer is not there with a safety net to help you out. So all of these concepts are extremely important in today's world for the simple fact that the burden of proof, the responsibility, is pushed onto the employee. It is no longer the employer's obligation or responsibility. One of the reasons for that, as we saw with Ida's situation with Social Security, is people are living far longer today than what they were many years ago. Let me give you some numbers. In 1940, we saw what life expectancy was in 1940. In 1900, the average life expectancy in America, give me a guess. How old? 47. Very good guess. 1900, average life expectancy was the age of 47. By the time we got to 1950, average life expectancy was 68. By the time we got to 2019, it was 79 years old. Okay, now that's a unisex number, male, female, okay? 79 years old. Interestingly enough, over the last year and a half or so, over the last 2 years, life expectancy in America has actually gone down. 2 reasons. You know what they are? COVID is one. What's the other one? Drug overdoses. Think about this. Do people who are 80 years old overdose on drugs? No. They're 15, 18, 20, 22, 30, 35 years old. Them dying is pulling average life expectancy actually back down. So some interesting facts. Okay, let's dive into Proverbs. There are a number of foundational financial principles. These are the kinds of things that if I would tell somebody to do anyway. Okay, obviously we'll run through these real quick, and we're going to look up a number of passages. Honor God with your money. Be diligent. Have a good work ethic. Be careful with debt. Interestingly enough, Proverbs is very specific about this. Don't co-sign. Proverbs is very specific about that. Seek advice from those with subject matter knowledge. Be financially prudent, financially faithful. Avoid get rich quick schemes. I did write that properly. Conduct yourself with honesty and integrity, and then be generous in giving to help the poor. So you are going to need a Bible this evening. So if you want to turn, let's start with Proverbs chapter 22, verse 2, where we find the following. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. Okay? So ultimately, no matter what your station in life, whether you have abundant resources, whether you don't have, resources are a hard thing to come by. Ultimately, everybody has that in common, in that the Lord is the maker of them all. As we're about to see here in a second, that's one of the reasons why we need to honor God. Let's go down to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, where we find the following. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. The reference there to first fruits, what's that talking about? It says, honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase. Off the top, the best of your crop, exactly. The first fruits, we're supposed to, have this practice of giving to God first, the best portion out of that harvest. Unfortunately, many people give God kind of the leftovers. Here's what's left over. Oh, let's see. I think I got $1 in my pocket. Let me, make that as my my contribution. They kind of do it if they can afford it. And obviously, it's the attitude that comes with that we have to be careful with. So again, that's why giving, we have to be purposed about it so that we're honoring the Lord with that first fruit. Okay? Now, I want to go down to Proverbs 21:3. We're not going to cover all of these verses, but I do want to go down to 21, verse 3, where we find the following. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Okay? So one of the things, what I take away from this is our personal and business dealings have to be characterized by what's right, by justice, if you will. No amount of generosity in our offerings or our giving of the things that we're doing, ultimately, that cannot make up for shady business dealings. Okay, so in everything that we do, we have to make sure that that we're conducting ourselves in such a fashion that we're honoring God, and that has to do with obviously how we go about obtaining those resources, as well as what we do with it, those resources, once they've come into our possession. And then the last one I want to cover on this slide is Proverbs 11:28. Somebody has that. Read that for me, if you would. 11:28. Okay, yeah, thank you, Mike. He who trusts in his riches will fall. The righteous will flourish like foliage, is the New King James Version. Ultimately, don't be fooled by your riches. Think about this. Our riches, if I could use that term for just a second, where do they come from? They come from God anyway, okay? Don't put your faith, your trust, your confidence in that. Obviously, put your faith, your trust, your confidence in God. Those riches, those resources that we have at our disposal. We have to make sure that we're not misplacing our confidence, our trust in things that are ultimately of this world. We have to make sure that we're placing that back with God. Let's move down to the second point, which is be diligent and have a good work ethic. Now, and I do have to acknowledge that Proverbs has so many passages that deal with financially related matters that there's absolutely no way that I could cover everything tonight. You may say, well, John, you overlooked one of the best passages, that relates to financial affairs and stuff, one of your favorites. That's very possible. But there's so much information, so much material in Proverbs that it's almost impossible, would be impossible in the time that we've got to cover everything. But let's take a look at, let's see. And I'm going to go to Proverbs chapter 10, verses 4 and 5 first. Somebody read that for me, if you would, please. Proverbs 10, 4 and 5, yes. Okay, so he who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Are we talking about literal wealth coming from being diligent? What do you think? What'd you say? Sometimes. How so?
If you earn it and you allow it to stack up.
Okay, so from that diligent effort. But how can riches come otherwise? Well, by being crooked, certainly. I would agree with that. But being born into it, inheriting resources, yeah. And again, it's interesting, in what I do for a living, I've seen probably every conceivable methodology of here's how someone came into money. Okay, just about everything that you could possibly imagine, from situations that, and this is really interesting. I don't know. Oh yeah, it's right here. To a point where I've learned always to keep a clean handkerchief on me in case I happen to choke up listening to someone else's story as to why they have a large pile of money and why they're in my office. Had a guy a few years ago, one of the most colorful looking people you'd ever want to see. It was in the summertime. He's sleeved out with tattoos, long beard, long hair. Sitting across the table, his tears ran down his cheeks as he said, "John, I got to be honest with you. I wish I'd never met you, because if my 4-year-old son were still alive today, I would have no reason to even be in your office." And when I swallowed, you could hear, me swallow, because it's like, wow, very powerful. What had happened was his son had been, they were in a rental property, and the son had been, due to the landlord's negligence, electrocuted in front of his 6-year-old sister. She watched it happen. And he was dead on the spot. And I'm sitting there listening to the story being told. It's like, wow, it's powerful, okay? So we do see in those instances sometimes where wealth comes, and I will give those folks credit. One of the things that they actually wanted to do was to become charitably inclined as a means of honoring their son. It was interesting. If you judged a book by its cover, the guy with the tattoos and real burly fella and so forth, when you got to know him, I was really inside a really good guy. I have to admit, he was a very good guy. Tragic circumstance though that they had experienced. So, in some instances here in Proverbs chapter 10, we are talking about literal wealth. Think about wealth though for a second. Can't we consider kind of basic life needs as wealth? Think about this. We're sitting, it's pretty chilly outside, despite the fact that, we've had a lot of HVAC challenges and such over the course of the last few months. It's fairly comfortable in here. Yesterday, if you were outside 24 hours ago, it was miserable outside, cold, rainy. I had a place to go home. It was dry, it was warm, it was comfortable. Those certainly are riches. Now think about this. Riches, if you will, have sort of a varying degree to it. So, a house could be exceptionally modest. I may not even have a place to live, but if I have clothing, if I have a pair of shoes that are waterproof on a night like last night, I've got some riches perhaps that somebody else doesn't have. Oftentimes I think here, especially in this country, we often tend to think of wealth as a balance sheet number. And make no mistake, in my office, I think like that because that's how I have to think, okay? But, a lot of times, it's nothing more than, I have enough food for today. I have enough, to keep me warm or to keep me dry or to keep the, to provide for myself at a very basic level, okay? I want to drop down to Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. It reads as follows: "He who tills his land will be satisfied with bread, but he who follows frivolity is devoid of understanding." So here's my question. Have you ever known someone who follows frivolity? Yes? No? Yes? What stands out about them? Obviously, they're frivolous. They live for the day. They kind of are, sort of this almost kind of a clowning around almost all the time. They're really not serious about, what's going on. I remember when I was in school, those classmates that engaged in frivolity, I did not like doing group projects with them as part of my group, right? Because guess what? The diligent people are going to be the ones doing most of the heavy lifting. You're going to do the work because they could care less. If we get a good grade on this project, that's fine with them. If not, they really didn't care, okay? So he who follows frivolity is devoid of understanding, but he who tills his land will be satisfied with bread. Again, so you look at Proverbs, an awful lot of passages in here that tie back to the attitudes that we should have. Let's do one more on being diligent in work ethic. Let's go down to Proverbs chapter 21, verses 5 and 6. And again, I've simply put a lot of passages up here. You're certainly more than welcome to, copy those down. I could even send you this deck if you'd like to, where I've gone through and pulled a lot of passages together. Again, we just don't have enough time to cover everything. But Proverbs 21, 5 and 6 reads as follows: "The plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty. Getting treasures by a lying tongue is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death." Okay? So again, being diligent, does lead to plenty. And, I've always considered myself very fortunate in that diligence, work ethic is something that I've always, from even my youngest memories, and I'm sure it was probably because it was instilled by my parents, work ethic was expected, okay? Now, I can tell you there are plenty of times where I grumbled about pulling weeds in the garden. I hated that. I'll admit it now. I wouldn't have told my father that many years ago because that would not have been a good thing to tell him. But I did not care for that. But I want to show you just real quick where my work ethic, the inspiration for my work ethic came from. That's a picture of Roy and Madge Everson. Those are my grandparents. That's also Catherine Foy's parents. So for those of you who don't know, Catherine is my aunt. That's Loy's in-laws. And of course, I guess that would be Kelly and Kim's grandparents as well, Mark and Jim's grandparents. It's also Scott Gaynor's great-grandparents. Did I say that right? Yes. Scott Gaynor's great-grandparents, because Scott's mother was a first cousin of ours. If you take a look at my grandfather, can you count how many fingers you would see if he was holding up both hands? You'll notice on his right hand, there's a hand there, but on his left, you can't really see the hand. I'll let you figure out what might have occurred that took his hand off. Now, Catherine, the other day, I had to ask her, I said, hey, let me confirm, Grandpa Everson lost his left hand she said, in an industrial accident, not necessarily at this mill. So that is not the blade that was responsible. But clearly in those days, OSHA hadn't gone through yet and said, oh my, this has got to have a protection guard on this thing, and this is very dangerous. But that actually is, in fact, if you notice the gentleman with the hat kind of pulled down where his eyes are shaded there, that is my grandfather. Again, you can see he's got his hand on some kind of a stake of some sort, maybe the lever for the saw, I don't know exactly. But you can see off the stub of his left arm there. My grandfather was a guy who could do physically anything that anybody else could do other than count to 10 on his fingers. It was the only thing I don't think he could do, okay? Not only did he, cut lumber in a mill, he also worked the farm was about 100 acres, worked a 100-acre farm with a team of horses and a large family, lots of children to help with that. He also mined coal during the days before mechanized coal mining. Pick and shovel with one hand. That's my inspiration for work ethic, is right there. Very impressive. Even as a child, I told Catherine this the other night, I was always fascinated by the fact that he could tie his shoes. This, of course, before the days of Velcro and all that silly stuff, and slip-on shoes. He could tie his shoes with 5 fingers. I couldn't do it very well with 10, and I was always fascinated by that. But, for me, I've always been considered a blessing, number one, to have them as examples because, in the church, first of all, but secondly, just hard-working people. That's all they knew. And, it's one of those, think about this. In today's world, a guy with one hand is, you qualify for some benefits, You're disabled. Go take it easy. You don't need to do anything. And I got to be honest with you, I think if my grandfather were alive today and still had that sort of a situation, I think he was of the mindset that, no, I'm more than capable of providing for myself, of looking after my family, of seeing that things still get done. So That has always been for me personally, just a big inspiration. Let's take a look at this one. So be careful with debt. Don't co-sign. So let's take a look at the first one there, Proverbs 22:7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. So that notion of being servant to the lender, is that like a household servant, a gardener, a maid, a butler? Is that what they're talking about there? You're in bondage. You are. So you're going to kind of do whatever they're saying anyway. Yes. Yeah, the rich rules over the poor, the borrower is servant to the lender. Ultimately, you do become, to a degree, a slave to whoever you are indebted to, because their terms, you have to fulfill their terms. And that's just, just the way it is. Let's go down to Proverbs 17:18. A man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. So a man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge. What do you think that's getting at, shaking hands in a pledge? Making an agreement. Oftentimes it involves financial matters. I promise I'll do this in exchange for. Usually there's some kind of give and take. Shaking hands in a pledge and becomes sureties for his friend. We're going to look at the notion of surety in just a second. In fact, let's jump down to Proverbs 22, 26 and 27, the last passage that I've got there. And it reads as follows: Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is surety for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? So here's my question. If you provide surety for another individual, another person, an entity, are you financially liable? Absolutely. Indeed you are. I'm amazed at the number of times you hear these situations where people, co-sign for someone or whatever, and they defaulted. Well, now they expect me to pay. Yeah? That's exactly what you agreed to. It's exactly what you agreed to. It's what I always tell people is, don't co-sign for something unless, and don't provide surety unless your own individual financial resources are sufficient to absorb that financial responsibility entirely on your own, and that you're willing to do that. That's literally what co-signing means. You're willing to do. If they don't perform, I will. Now, usually most people, are very careful about who and they co-sign for and the circumstances in which that occurs. Oftentimes it comes down to, well, maybe co-sign for my children or, that sort of thing. But, and it's very interesting that, and I deal with this a lot, people will have some kind of an operating entity for a business, an LLC, limited liability company, where they go to borrow money to purchase a piece of real estate, whatever it might happen to be, and the lender wants a personal guarantee because an entity can't be ultimately held liable. They want someone, an individual, to basically say, yes, I will co-sign on behalf of that entity, okay? And again, if you're going to do that, you just have to make sure you fully understand what that means. And if you don't think you can absorb all of that financial responsibility on your own out of your pocket, you need to be very careful about co-signing, okay? So, and Proverbs is really, really clear. There's a lot of passages that are very clear about that. In the interest of time, let's kind of keep pushing forward here. Seek advice from those with subject matter knowledge. I want to look at, let's go to Proverbs 12, verse 1, which reads, Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. Okay? That's the New King James Version. So whoever loves instruction loves knowledge. He who hates correction obviously still has some work to do. Again, subject matter knowledge, especially in today's world, anything that is financially related, you have to make sure you fully understand exactly what's going on, what comes into play, because again, people wind up sometimes getting themselves into situations that are tough. I do want to touch on this one really quick. Be financially prudent, avoid get-rich-quick schemes. Let's look at Proverbs 28, verse 20. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. So don't hasten to be rich. Take your time. Be patient. Accumulating money, as I like to tell people all the time, requires two things. It requires time and money. The more you have of one, the less you need of the other. Okay? If you got a lot of time, you don't really need a lot of money. You can do well over the context of time. I want to address something. I don't know if you guys saw this. Over the weekend, last Friday, there was a company that dealt with cryptocurrencies, FTX, that just vaporized, just gone, disappeared. So I was at our firm's national conference back in May. I heard our chief investment officer is a gentleman who oversees the management of $1 trillion+. $1 trillion. I wanted to describe to you how he referred to cryptocurrency, okay? He said the kids are in the attic playing with matches and the adults don't seem to care. And I thought, wow, that was kind of powerful. Now, I do have to acknowledge, our firm, if someone says, hey, John, can you buy me Bitcoin? The answer is no, I can't. They will not allow us to hold anything like that on our firm's platform. Interesting enough, John Everson personally cannot own those things because anything that I do has to be on our firm's platform. Therefore, they restrict us even from things like that. Here's the point that I make. Something like that where there's, in effect, there's these as I understand cryptocurrency, these agreements and acknowledgments and so forth, there's in effect, there's no hard assets that back that. Give you a good example. We go down here to Procter & Gamble, and we can do an inventory of all of their stuff in their, all of their factories all over the world, all of their equipment, all their real estate holdings. We could add it up. We could divide that number by the number of shares outstanding. We could come up with here's about how much that stock should be trading per share. We can do that. But when there's nothing there other than sort of agreements and acknowledgments and air to back something, that's why suddenly companies just implode. Be very careful about what, in this context, what we'll refer to as a get-rich-quick scheme. And I am about to run out of time. I've got just a ton of material that I'm not going to get to, but I do want to get down to one thing here. Oops. So John, if you want to go ahead and get ready for that song. So I do want to offer this evening an opportunity to be rich, but not in a financial sense, okay? Rich in the salvation of Jesus Christ. Social Security may fail, pension plans may fail, cryptocurrencies may implode and disappear. None of that stuff matters. Salvation of Jesus Christ, though, will never fail, but just like preparing for the future, you must take action. You must prepare yourself. This evening, obviously, we do extend an invitation. If anybody has a need that that needs to be fulfilled, if you've fallen away, you need the prayers of the church. If you've studied, you've come to the conclusion that many have lately that you should be baptized. I think the things that are going on here is tremendous. And if you've reached that point where you recognize that's something that you need to do as well, Roland is somewhere. He's ready to sing an invitation song. If you would make your desires